What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. You guys, Derek and Cody with you as always. And guys, we wanted to talk about this because everyone's a little bit on edge with the Indianapolis Colts. We're not going to lie. We see it all. And there's doubt for sure. Indianapolis, went into Atlanta this last week and not only lost, they got destroyed, and it was the second time in the last 3 weeks that the Indianapolis Colts laid a giant goose egg to another team that, a lot of people thought that they should have won against. And there's a lot of question marks going on around this team right now, rightfully so. And now the big question is, Cody, is, are the Colts throwing away their chances at the playoffs right now? And that's going to be the big topic for today. Just looking at it from this perspective, Colts still sit at the 7th seed. The Texans are at the 8th seed. The Bengals are at the 9th seed. And the Steelers are at the 10th seed. All teams that are 8 and 7 going into Week 17 matchup. Let's just talk about it real quick here, Cody. From what you saw and what you now feel about the Colts going after that Falcons game, do you feel the pressure of the Indianapolis Colts not making the playoffs now way more than ever?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the fact that they've played completely like garbage, let's be honest, 2 out of the last 3 weeks, that is very concerning. You thought, okay, you get the bad game out of your system in Cincinnati, and then, okay, you're good. But then, no, you go down to Atlanta, who, I even said, like, they have talent. Like, they're not a talentless team. I just think that maybe it was, just a bad situation where Arthur Smith obviously coaching for his job and actually started getting his guys involved, and the Colts just played poorly. How many missed tackles do they have? I know it was a stat on there. I don't have the number in front of me right now, but just a ridiculous amount of missed tackles. Just the Colts not doing things they're characteristically good at this year. It's just very strange to see that because for the majority of the time, you would say the things that have collapsed 2 out of the last 3 weeks have typically been strengths, Derek, of this team. And it's just been weird to see the Colts kind of revert and go back in certain ways and just take steps back. Things that they have been built on this year that have led them to some really good success against some really good defenses. So it's just really strange to see them kind of get into this funk offensively and defensively. And yeah, you look at the next 2 weeks, and these aren't going to be cakewalks either. These are going to be very difficult games for very difficult squads that are very well coached and have a lot, on the line. These are 2 teams right there in the AFC mix who will be competing for the Colts for a wild card spot. So, yeah, it is very concerning that the Colts are, just really not playing well at all. I know, not having Michael Pittman in that game, that's obviously huge, but come on, you got to be better than you were. You weren't able to run the ball. You couldn't throw the ball consistently. You couldn't protect the quarterback. You couldn't do anything. And then defensively, they couldn't tackle to save their lives, couldn't get after the quarterback, couldn't cover anybody, like that kind of stuff where you're like, okay, this defense has had issues, but they've typically been able to make up for some of those issues with some of the big plays, the turnovers, the sacks. And then 2 of the last 3 weeks, when they've really like struggled, they haven't been able to do really either of those things. I mean, really the only time between the 2 losses they've had where the defense has done anything is the Ronnie Harrison pick 6, and that's it. This defense has been really not playing well the last couple weeks. Pittsburgh, it's like they had a bounce-back game against Pittsburgh, and then they just kind of reverted right back. And so it's just really strange to see this team, really underperforming and just not coming out and looking extremely flat. That's just not been something we've seen of a Shane Steichen team much this season. So it's really weird to see them at the point they are right now, 2 of the last 3 weeks just coming out flat. And honestly, Derek, looking like what people thought the Colts would look like this year in a lot of ways, especially without Anthony Richardson, not being able to move the ball, not being able to stop anybody. So it's very concerning, especially considering there's 2 teams that, while they definitely have flaws, I mean, these 2 teams can easily, we texted about it, they can easily beat you, easily.
It is definitely put the Colts under a microscope now, because now you're in the situation where if you're currently sitting with a 51% chance to make it into the playoffs currently as you sit. If you lose, you have a 24% chance to get in. If you win, your odds go up to 70%. So basically just insinuates the Colts just need to win out if they want to be able to have a chance to be able to make it to where they want to be. It's going to be something because, like you said, Cody, these next two opponents that you have, the Colts this year, and we talked about it, we're not really going to get into the season in general. We'll save that for a later time for when the season comes to an end. But I think it does say something that, the Indianapolis Colts still fighting for a playoff spot despite that loss. It kind of is crazy to see just how many people have given up on the Colts after that game, which is quite crazy to me because, I get it. I was angry about it just as much as everyone else. But I also took a step back and I realized that, yes, the loss really sucked. The team did not play well. But at the same time, I'm sitting there saying to myself, this team still has a good chance to do what they need to do, because we saw what happened after they had their first meltdown, right? Against even their first real meltdown of the year, Cody, I would say was against Jacksonville when we went to Jacksonville. That next week when we played the Browns, yes, we lost. I use that term lightly, but the Colts looked a lot better the next week than what they did after. And when we saw them lose against the Bengals, the next week we whooped the Steelers, right? And then I had this understanding that the Colts, after they suffer a bad loss like this, they tend to kind of come back to reality. It's like a wake-up call for them. And I hope that they prove me right, that they just needed another butt kicking to finally realize, hey, they got to start playing better.
Yeah. I mean, it's just been weird this year, Derek, because this team, we've talked about it multiple times to really take hold of this AFC South. I mean, they are fortunate the AFC South is crumbling as much as it is the other teams that they're in contention with, because I'll be honest, Derek, the biggest criticism I've had of Shane Steichen this year is in the big moments when this team has needed to step it up, right? Against the Cincinnati Bengals, against, here recently. They've really wilted under the pressure when they've had chances to really take the division by the throat and really, make their stake as the number one team in the AFC South. They've done exactly what all the other teams have done, and they have not risen to the occasion. And in fact, they played worse, actually. And so something's got to give, man. They got to figure something out. I know they've had some key guys out, but that's no excuse. It's a next man up kind of game, and they got to figure it out. And they can't be as streaky as they are. And again, Derek, it's funny because you talked about how people have just given up on this team. Derek, I guarantee you there's a good chunk of those people who didn't give the Colts a chance to make the playoffs in the first place. So it's just kind of funny how the narrative has changed in certain ways when people say, at the beginning of the season, the Colts are going to be one of the worst teams. They're going to be in the Marvin Harrison Jr. sweepstakes. I remember people saying that, before the season. It's just funny how the kind of the goalposts have changed. And now people are saying it's going to be a disappointing season if the Colts don't make the playoffs. It's just like, well, where was the expectation? Because the expectation for some people has definitely shifted from where it was at the beginning of the season. And the fact that the Colts are in this at all, we've talked about this. I think that's a win in itself, because the fact that this team has really come out of nowhere, and a lot of people did not expect the Colts to even be competing for a playoff spot. I think that's huge, and I think that's something that's not talked about enough. Now, of course, would not be a great look if you lost the last 2 weeks of the season and you didn't make the playoffs. You still got to take care of business. But what I'm saying is, I just am very impressed with how this team, they definitely had so many chances, Derek, going back to what you even said about how they responded. They've had chances to just pack it in and give it up for the year. I mean, gosh, you think about all the issues they've had, all the things they've had this year. We could talk about that. We have, in detail in different videos about all the adversity this team has faced And yet here they are. They're not a perfect team. They definitely aren't great at times. But here they are still in contention because they're a team that doesn't go away. They'll have a bad performance and they'll come back from it. And we'll see if they do. I mean, it's going to be tough. These opponents aren't, the Pittsburgh Steelers, or these opponents aren't the Carolina Panthers or whoever you want to throw in there. Like, these are some legit teams that I think are very hot right now. Definitely have some different weapons and different ways that they can beat the Colts. And I think people would argue maybe both these teams are better than the Colts. I mean, I don't know how we feel. We might not agree with that, but I could see people saying and projecting the Colts to be the underdogs in the final 2 weeks. I could see that being a reality.
I could see it for the Texans. Listen, I get the recency bias with the Raiders. I get it. I really do. I think that everyone is seeing the Raiders are just winning. No matter how bad they're winning it by, they're just winning. And I think that's why people are like, oh, yeah, look at the Raiders. Look how amazing they are. But they're barely outside of the Chargers game. They're really not being that dominant over these other teams. I'll explain that later. We'll explain that when we talk about the Raiders and whatnot later on. But here's to kind of just end it with this. So Indy, even if they lost to the Raiders, now get this, Cody. So here's how it works. So just to paint the picture for the rest of this, right? The Texans have to face the Titans one more time. They're going to be facing the Titans one more time. The Bengals. Now, the Texans, even if they win and we lose, that doesn't really matter. Because if we beat the Texans in Week 18, then ultimately we take their spot back from them. So ultimately it doesn't matter. But with the Bengals, so the Bengals have to play the Chiefs this upcoming week. That is huge. If the Chiefs can pull that one off, if the Chiefs can hold on and beat the Bengals, then that's huge for Indy's playoff chances. Because if the Bengals have the same record as us or a worse record than us, then they still can get ahead of us because obviously the Bengals would end up having a better record. They get ahead. The Steelers, we already have the head-to-head matchup over them. Even if the Raiders have the head-to-head on us, I still think they're down a perimeter when it comes to that. And the Raiders have to play the Broncos in their final game. And the Broncos have been playing semi-decent football today. But at the same time, it also concerns me that the Raiders have to play the Broncos because did you hear that the Broncos are going to cut Russell Wilson, supposedly?
Yep, he's gone. He's benched. He's
him.
not playing. Yep.
Yeah, which is absolutely insane because the Broncos, who, as it stands currently, would still have a chance potentially to make the playoffs if they won their last two games, potentially. But if you're Indy, you're sitting there to yourself, the season's not over if something drastically bad were to happen. But I think the biggest factor of all of this, Cody, is Indy for the last two games is at home. You're going to be back at home in your corridor, back with your home team in your hometown, doing all this in front of the home crowd. And I think it's so big for the momentum of this. I know that on social media, a lot of people have given up on this Colts team already for whatever reason. But I know that Indy still loves what the Colts are doing and knows there's still a chance. And for that reason, I think it's so big because obviously you lose to Atlanta the way you did. You went to Atlanta. You had all these situations. Hopefully you get Braden Smith back this week, which we're hoping. We hope you get Michael Pittman back this week. If you get both those guys back, that just opens everything up for Indy to be able to get back to their original playbook. I won't be able to discuss this with you tomorrow because I'm going to be working. So I'll just say this right here. Again, if the Colts just protect the football, Cody, if we protect the football and don't give up big plays and quit missing tackles, then this Indianapolis Colts team can very well beat both the Raiders and the Texans. They very well can. They've got to protect Gardner Minshew. They've got to be able to run the football, and you got to protect the football. As long as you don't turn the ball over to the Raiders will not beat you. As long as you do not give up the football. If you turn the ball over like what the Chargers did and what the Chiefs did, then yes, you will lose. But if you can just keep yourself from doing that, then I think Indy ends up winning this out.
Yep. That's the thing, Derek. They can. We know they very well can because they've gone in and they've beaten Houston before. They beat them in Houston. I know that was early on in the season. Heck, they went and beat Baltimore in Baltimore. They put a whipping on the Steelers a couple weeks ago. So, this team, they have the talent to do it. They have the players to do it. I don't think that's a question mark. They have, the coaches to do it. It's just a matter of, will they show up? And like you said, will they play smart football? Derek, I think the last couple losses, you look at this team and you just say, they've been one of the dumbest teams in football in the last couple weeks when they've lost. I mean, turning the ball over, not being able to do anything, not being able to tackle or cover, not being able to stop a simple screen pass, things like that where you're just like, this is common football. This is going back to training camp basics, Derek. The Colts haven't been able to do. And then it's whenever you get a good play, it's negated by something stupid that you do, in another place. So it's just they just got to be smart. They got to play with, up to the capability that we know that they can, because they've shown it this year. It's not like this team has just either been, blown out teams or been blown out. They've been able to put together some really, really good stretches and play some really good football. Hasn't always been pretty, like the Raiders. They've had some moments where it's certainly been ugly, but this team has definitely found some ways to win when they needed to. And so they just got to get back to that. They got to shake off the last couple, losses and just realize that's not who they've been traditionally this entire season. So if they get back to be playing, the type of Indianapolis Colts football we've seen this year for the majority of the time, I think they're going to be just fine. But again, Derek, it ultimately comes down to, can they come out and will they play up to their potential? Because if they do, I think you're right. They have a great chance to go 2-0 in the next 2 weeks. But if not, very well could go 0-2, and you could be out of the playoffs, and you could be in the top 15 conversation for a draft spot, which is crazy to think about. But Derek, that's how crazy the AFC is right now, with all these teams literally right there in the playoff picture. So it's going to be wild. But I'm intrigued to see how they finish. They've had some good stretches this year. They've been able to finish games, but they've also had some games where they haven't been able to put it all together. So yeah, two more games. It'll be very interesting to see how Shane Steichen and company have this team ready to go here at home, like you mentioned, the next 2 weeks to wrap up the season. And the Colts can go 2-0, playoff time. That would be great, but we'll see.
Yep, absolutely. But that's going to do it for this one, guys. Let us know your thoughts. Have you given up on the Colts this year, or do you think the Indianapolis Colts are still primed for a playoff hunt? Let us know your thoughts, guys. Thank you so much for all the support. And as always, guys, go Colts.